Hello, my name is Natalie Zacharias, intending your spirit. I'm so happy for you all to join us in episode 7 of the Cosmic Earth Conversations. I'm here with my dear friend Shalini Rao, and I'm so excited to be connecting with you across time and space. Shal is calling from India. It is Monday night, and it's Monday morning for me. And yeah, I'm really happy and excited for this conversation. Shal and I went to graduate school together and have just a really special relationship. So I'm happy to introduce her to all of you. And Shal, if you could just take a moment, introduce yourself, and whatever's on your heart in the moment.
Thanks, Nat. This is so special to be in this moment with you and all the folks who may be joining us in their own time and space. This feels really special to be in this experience across time and space with you. I find that to be so supportive to the parts of me that really, really miss being in the same time and space with you.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you. What's on my heart right now is just a deep sense of appreciation that we're here together. I'm aware of feeling activated because I had a very high energy day. So even though my body is tired, I'm feeling very alert. That's kind of how I'm experiencing this moment. What's on your heart, Nat?
I am surprisingly feeling very awake this Monday morning. And I know a lot of that has to do with feeling excited and connecting with you. And yeah, I just find myself thinking of like our experiences when we were in time and space, as you were saying, and the really beautiful, like precious moments that we've shared together. So that's what's present for me in this moment, for sure. I'm thinking of before we started recording, Shal and I were sharing our beverages, and so I was sharing with her. Well, at least Shal, if you could share what you're drinking.
I'm drinking something very fancy. I'm drinking a hibiscus lime kombucha with ice in it because it's getting quite warm where I'm at. So yeah, that I mean, for my context, having a glass of iced kombucha on a Monday night is pretty fancy.
And I love it because I love hibiscus. And I was telling Shal my concoction of like it's like coffee, adaptogenic herbs, mushrooms, and then a little bit of cacao. The cacao actually has rose, and rose for me is very connected to my relationship with Shal. Is one of those memories that I have is when Shalini taught me how to make rose honey, and it was just such a precious. I don't know if you want to actually speak about rose honey and the significance of
Oh my
um,
gosh. Such
why I was so excited.
totally. Oh my god, I love that you are holding that experience in our space and contact right now. So yeah, so the there's this Indian snack slash sweet slash jam called gulkand, which is something that I've just grown up eating. It's basically rose that is disintegrated with honey or sugar. Um, and I don't know if it's a winter snack or a summer snack. I think it's a winter thing, but it's just something that oh no, I think it's a summer thing because it's supposed to cool down the system or something to that effect. But I remember when we were in Berkeley in your neighborhood,
Yeah.
I found this tree with really sweet smelling roses, and it had this abundance of roses, like just this wild abundant sweet smelling roses. Like I didn't even have to like pick them up, they were just like falling off.
Yeah.
And I had this intuition that this smell is like, it tells me that I can taste it. So I remember tasting those flowers, and it was sweet. Like the flower was sweet to eat, and I was like, "This is what, like this is a sign. We need to make gulkand."
Yeah.
So I remember like it was a nice afternoon in your house, and we got one of those mason jars and just layered up rose petals and honey, and the idea was that we would let it sit for about 10 days. And then it had its own plans.
Yeah.
The jar had its own, it had a different journey to make. Do you want to talk about that, Nat?
Yeah. Well, to give context too, some of you may not know this, but my father's Indian and he comes from Kerala. And so growing up, I was not really raised because I'm mixed. And so I wasn't fully raised in either of the cultures of my parents. I would say more so my mom's than my father's. My mom's from Colombia. And so I've been, for the past few years, like very hungry to um, reclaim more of like my ancestral ways and connections. That's probably the best way to describe that. Honoring my ancestors and just really just hungry for connection, truly. And I would even say actually in the past few days, I mean, past few years, I would say that has been like a lifetime desire of mine to feel um, some sense of connection because, being a child of immigrants in a culture that um, strongly encourages assimilation and then not feeling quite um, like I don't fit here, I don't fit there, I don't fit there. It's been definitely, like I can say for sure, decades and decades of like wanting to feel connection. And so by the time I made it out to California and when Shaw came into my life, it was something that I felt like was an integral part of our relationship too, of like, I remember, I hope it's okay I share this, but I remember um, I had changed my name on Facebook to have my middle name as my last name. And I didn't quite know Shawl yet at this point. Like we were like acquaintances at that point. And I remember her reaching out to me and just like being curious about Ronnie and like, because Ronnie, I didn't know this. Ronnie means queen, and comes from India. It's my middle name named after one of my aunts, and so I was just like, yeah, it's my middle name, and like I'm half Indian. Hey, don't look it, but that's part of who I am, and it has felt like a very like one of the sweet I don't know connecting points that we have is that you very much like nurturing that part of me that just wants to know more. Um, and it's felt in some ways like when you told me about the roses, I remember at first being like, "You can eat roses? What?" I think that actually is I said that. You're like, "Yeah, try it," and I was like, "Huh, this tastes good." And the whole process of making the honey, like I remember this like the sun was involved in the in the process, and washing the petals and then putting it on the paper towel so they can dry, and the whole process. And yeah, what ended up happening with this jar, I didn't tell one of my housemates about the location of the jar. I had it in the front because it needs sun to be part of the process of it changing into what it'll change into. Um, and I forget how this happened, but my one housemate didn't know of its existence and hit the jar and it broke. And I didn't know about this. And they tried to recover it. They put it in a new jar. And every day, like I would come home from work after like working with clients, and I would like, because I remember you telling me you had to like shake it. And I remember going and looking like, this is a different jar, being very confused. I'm like, I swear this is a different jar. There's like, I'm pretty sure this is a different jar. And then having the conversation of discovering that what happened. And like my housemate was like so apologetic and felt so horrible. and like was like I tried my best to save it, and I was like, oh, like you're so precious, like thank you so much for trying. And it's also probably not a good idea to have to try to consume this. It could potentially have glass, and ended up being offerings for my ancestors instead of it being something that I would consume. It ended up being something that I offer to my ancestors and to the earth, and to the candomblé, which are the little people with me who love honey. Incidentally, I'm pretty sure actually they probably played a big role in the honey ending up being something that was offered to them instead of something I consumed. I
You
wouldn't
know,
be surprised.
I didn't know this detail. Like it makes so much sense now going by how much I know about your relationship with the contomble. This sounds like, yeah, of course they were involved.
They were like, "That's for us."
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it was really, and I actually haven't tried making it since. I have actually found someone who makes um, rose honey, and I have a little jar underneath this table right here in the cupboard. There's like a small jar of rose honey that I very sparingly use, but it's
Uh-huh.
not what we created together. And it
Yeah,
feels like I will one day recreate it.
yeah.
It's just
Yep.
haven't
It's
found those roses to be completely honest.
yeah.
So
I wonder
yeah,
if it's like those roses are specific to sunny Berkeley, California, kind of.
probably.
Although, yeah,
Yeah,
I
which is
trust that.
interesting. Go ahead.
No, I trust that they'll find you when they're ready.
Yeah, yeah. The ancestors always lead the way, right?
Mhm. Mm.
As we sip.
Yep.
Well, something that I love is that that relationship with the land. I feel like that um, is something that you and I, like in our own ways, have. Um, I mean, I don't know if it's been like this for you, but at least for me, there's ways that I've reclaimed that for myself and continue to reclaim. Um, as a child growing up, I was very much connected with the land. Like you couldn't keep me inside if you tried to. And my mom says like as much as she wanted me to be like a girly girl growing up, I would be like in the mud or in the dirt. She has a memory of we visited one of my father's friends who lived on a river, and they would, I don't know, do whatever adults did, and I would go by myself to the river. He had a rowboat that I was always allowed to play in, and I would go and when this memory, the reason that's coming up is my mom said that one time we tried to leave, and I was like, no, I have to go say goodbye to the river, and like ran down to go say goodbye to the river. So for me, this connection to land,
Mm.
not only the land I lived on, but like just wherever I am physically in existence, having that connection
Yeah.
feels so essential to life.
Mhm.
And I know you yourself have your own unique connection, well, your own connection with the land. So
Mhm.
I'd love if you'd be open to sharing, you know.
Totally. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just loving the image of you as a child going back to say goodbye to the river. I just, I'm like, yep, I can see little Natalie doing that.
Right.
Um, yeah, yeah, just such a beautiful thing to know about you. Um, so I feel like my relationship with Earth
Yeah.
um, sort of just kind of exploded into deep, like a deep relationship around the time when we met
Hmm.
in California. I feel like something about that time in my life, all those years ago, when I experienced an internal awakening to something. There's something that just, of course, my physical context was that I lived my entire life in India in urban cities,
Right.
and then when I was 24, I moved to the US to study, to go to grad school. But I chose to go to a grad school that, for a large part, for most part, was um, alternative in its values. And
Yeah.
I got an opportunity to experience an education system that would allow me to build a relationship with myself, as opposed to what education has usually been for me, which is to be external, which is to be objective, which is to be um, like very like to build the intellect, to build the um, ability to use few parts of my brain.
Yeah.
um, and here I was in this profoundly life-changing moment where I was receiving education, I was experiencing an education that was encouraging of me, where the education was about
Yeah.
developing and supporting and nurturing my relationship with myself. And the more I imploded into myself, the more I experienced an explosive relationship unfold with the land that I was on, which meant I felt this hunger to know the stories of the indigenous peoples, know the stories of people who've lived there for multiple generations, from multiple cultural identities and cultural experiences. And something about knowing um, the kind of multiplicity that exists on the Ohlone land, which is
Mhm.
now San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, the Bay Area. Something about that was like a way for me to connect with the natural world and connect with myself as part of the natural world and not separate from the natural world,
Yeah.
and therefore begin an unfolding of my own relationship with where I come from.
Yeah.
Um, and I knew right then that because I have a complicated relationship with where I come from, I have to go back, and I have to
Yeah.
now, with transformation, this sense of opened awareness, I need to go back
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
support this awareness um, to unfold in all of its complications. So I knew that that would mean the luxuries I had in the Bay Area, which was like clean air, access to the ocean. Um, I mean, of course, clean water in the US is also relative and
Right.
depends on, which I totally get that. But then here I was experiencing intense beauty around me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew that going back to India would mean I go back to a city, because that's where my work is. That's what I'm rooted in. So I knew that going back to a city in India would mean exposing myself to the rising levels of pollution and congestion and like population density and meaning, and so knowing that when I come back here, I'm going to experience a certain shock of
Yeah.
coming back, but with a new self, with a new skin.
Yeah.
um, so for me, in the last 2.5 years, has
Yeah.
like the work has really been about holding that complexity of the multiple forms of oppression that the land here endures, that the people here endure, um, and to continue the work of nurturing what that beauty is for me within, and to keep pursuing that beauty outside of me as well. Um, so, what that looks like is to, I mean, for some more context of what's happening in India right now politically, as I'm sure you're aware of a little bit of that, and folks may be following some of that on the internet, is that currently there's the largest farmers protest that's happening in India,
Mm-hmm.
and something about the fact that um, the farmers of this country are organizing in this humongous way to resist unjust laws that are being passed, which do not include or take into consideration or consult with farmers themselves.
Yeah.
Something about knowing that the people who work with the land in the most direct sense,
Yeah.
something about their resistance being so alive in this moment.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, there are also activists, climate justice, environmental justice activists who are coming to the fore in support of the farmers, and they
Yeah.
are also being silenced. Any voice of dissent is currently being silenced in the current political establishment
Yeah.
in this country. And it's hard for me to articulate that as what it means for me in my relationship with land and earth,
Yeah.
but it somehow, in a felt sense, it all connects. It
Yeah.
connects. It feels like it makes sense for me that this is a moment that I chose to return
Yeah.
and be in full um, embodied confrontation
Yeah.
with the realities um, of this land right now,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
ways in which rights of the people and rights of the land are being taken away step by step, layer by layer, one by one. Um, and it just feels like work, like this is the work um, of being in confrontation, even if I identify as a therapist, even if my work can look like only um, limited to a therapy room. There's
Right.
so much about this that is not limited to the therapy room. Like, so much about this feels like, no, but the work is happening in simply existing in awareness, in confrontation, in sensitivity to
Yeah.
this world, without disengaging, without looking the other way, because
Yeah.
it's right here. It is happening right now in our faces.
Yeah.
um, so curious what that is like for you to hear, and I want to hear
It's interesting.
what yeah
Yeah.
and I also want to hear what your relationship with land is as well, and how
Yeah.
what overlaps, what differences you experience.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting because that what you said about like how it well, this is how my brain took it in, so I don't know if this is what you meant, but like when you were saying about like being a therapist, like how that's outside of being a therapist, there is a part of me that feels like actually I feel like that would be integral, because
Yes.
like if you're not practicing social justice in in your way of relating to the world, and if you happen to be privileged to be in the position of being a therapist for someone, so in essence holding space for someone, or if you're not, like in my case, I don't practice as under the word of therapist just because I'm not pursuing my licensure, so like I can't call myself a therapist, but I still hold space for people and their healing. If you're not having that lens of social justice in that, I feel like um, you're missing the point,
Yeah.
is my perspective. Like
Yeah.
you're missing a whole big part of being human, because that is like you're not only cutting off, people who are oppressed, who are like under the heavy foot of oppression. You're also cutting off yourself and parts of you that are oppressed as well. And then how could you show up for people and holding their complexities if you can't even show up for the complexity of who you are, or the complexity of like this human experience and like what it is to live on the earth. um, that's like that comes up for me, because I think it could be a um, incredibly slippery slope. I can't even say that word. And and also makes me think of like that thought process makes me go into like how spiritual communities, and something that you and I both experienced um, in the school that we went to, and also in the Bay Area too, of having that confrontation of like um, spiritual bypassing, and like, it's just love and light, and like, it could be positive,
Yeah.
and that like forced of like only looking at the good, not acknowledging the shadow, how dangerous that is, because in the shadow lurks without a lens, like keeping eye on it, and comes out in the way that it does, because when that which you ignore persists until you hear it. And so,
Yeah.
you know, um, my understanding of what's happening in India is very much of like, makes me think of like what has happened here in the US, of how farmers have like how uh big, I think it's called big AG, how like the corporations have taken over the farming culture here, and how much that has really, really detrimentally like fucked, excuse me for my language, but like that's like really ruined the land, you know? And how like it's just it's a very like consumer, like take, and not
Mhm.
being in some reciprocity, and
Mhm.
how that has caused, so much problems because of that.
Yeah.
This my friend my friend Liv, who channels the
Mhm.
Contemble once, in a ceremony, we were talking about like consumerism, and they broke down the word consumer and like
Mhm.
consume her.
Wow.
And I remember being like, oh damn, like yeah,
Mhm.
we do. Like
Mhm.
that's what consumerism does. Consume her.
Yeah.
Her being the earth, her being the feminine within all of us, not like, for
Oof.
me, like feminine masculine is not like a gender thing. It's
Mhm.
literally life energy that flows
Yeah.
within all of us. And so there's so many different layers of like what consume her can look like.
Yep.
And when I think of like what is trying to happen in India, how that reflects of what has already happened here in the US, and
Yeah.
how like small farmers have so much difficulty,
Yeah.
and there's so much challenges. And you know I mean, there's just so many documentaries talking about like the difference of needing to like farm
Mhm.
differently to actually just help the earth,
Yeah.
um like become healthy again. Even just
Yeah.
like the soil, like when you think, like when you look at those movements of like,
Yeah.
um I forget what it's called, I can't, it's like it's escaping my mind, but like the restoration of the soil and how much that can reverse,
Mhm.
uh can help in supporting reverse climate change, and like the how the soil can help with like reducing carbon in the atmosphere and all those things. And
Yeah.
um, because of this like uh, excess, or over, it's just basically not being in reciprocity. Really, it's like this way that we've operated for so long of not being in reciprocity with like the natural way, and how
Mhm.
much like damage that has caused. And then the fact that like some people are like, some governments are starting to wake up, but I'm kind of suspicious of it too, because I feel like I don't trust in like the altruicity of the governments at all. Just,
Mhm.
just like the past has just taught a
Yeah.
lot about
Yeah.
that. And but I do trust in like humans who are, people coming together, who are truly actually, trying to um, create change in the
Yes.
ways that we relate with one another, with the earth, with all living beings.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so those are the things that come into mind for me. It feels like very like, no, don't do it, India. Don't.
Yeah.
It looks good, and then it's complicated too, because there's this supremacy that exists, that, for I could say for sure, has shown its ugly face here in the US. I mean, it has always existed if you were a person of color or any kind of like oppressed community. You've always known it existed, because you have, I mean, I can say I was like confronted with it in many ways, both in my face and also in like microaggressions and stuff like that, which feel like very slick, sly ways of um, hurting people. It's just the best way to describe it. And I know that's the thing in not just India, but like all around the world, how supremacy, which also feels very much in alignment with like consumerism and systems of oppression and like living out of reciprocity with life and all those things. So that yeah, all of that comes up.
Yeah.
Sure, a lot more. That's the stream I have right now.
I totally see in like when I hear you speak of this, like I'm thinking of intersectionality, right? Like the meeting point of supremacy, any ideology of supremacy, whether it's one's ethnic supremacy, one's I mean, I'm realizing it's usually ethnic supremacy, right? Like in the US, if it's of being of European descent, of a certain European descent, what we now know as white supremacy. In India, currently, it's of being of a certain Hindu Brahminical descent. So it's not easy to describe it in an ethnic frame, but it kind of also can be looked at as, okay, so if you're light skinned, if you come from a lineage of priests or a lineage of warriors, then that's what gives you supremacy, right? So in India right now, it's about what is being called, like what can be easily looked at as Brahminical supremacy or Savarna supremacy, and the word Savarna translates to being of a dominant caste, which really resembles the caste system of racial hierarchy in the US.
Yeah.
But like what you were saying about how consumerism like rests on that ideology of dominance is so related, it's so relevant to what we're speaking of in terms of our relationships with earth, right? Like someone right now, if like the government in India right now is constantly espousing Hindu supremacy and a specific type of Hindu supremacy, it is also at the same time pursuing the destruction of natural resources, and it's pursuing collaboration with large corporations. That, like, the whole farming bill right now is about the power that private companies will now have over what is produced. I mean, of course, that's a very simplistic, simplified way of saying it, but at the core of it, it is really about who gets more rights and who gets less rights at this moment. And the scales are tipped towards those who have consumeristic interests at their heart, in their heart. But I'm just like, I'm thinking of how the similarities of cultural supremacy that exist in the United States and in India. I was having a conversation with a friend today about how in India it feels, who also lived in the US for a number of years. So we have a sort of a shared understanding of navigating these two cultural geographical locations. And we were talking about how in India we notice that the authoritarianism, the oppression from the current regime is so unfiltered, undisguised. It's just blatant. Like there is no nuance. It's like in your face authoritarianism. And in the US, it's often disguised. Like until recently, it was only like in the last 4 years during Trump's presidency that things became like in your face. But usually the oppression in the United States is a lot more disguised. It comes in the form of, liberal liberal capitalism.
Totally.
It comes in the form of so many things that I'm like you totally know of, being um, a woman of color in the US. Like you will get that.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and there's just that difference as well, which I find very striking.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because it's not. If I think back of like before, I really like I'll say going to California opened my mind and eyes and heart in ways that had I stayed in New Jersey, I would continue to be ignorant because even being a woman of color, I was not aware of all these things. And I think that's like a really it was I mean, we were in that class together, multicultural psychology, when I like really just broke down. Like I think all of us did in that one day long, it was like a Saturday. I just remember because I was supposed to go to a concert later that night and I
Everyone
like
was
couldn't.
fine. Everyone was triggered.
Like I just like stayed in the bathtub and cried. Like this. But like it was, you know, as painful an experience as that was, it also just opened me up to like the reason why it was so painful is because I realized all these things I was experiencing throughout my entire life and never had that ability to point my finger at it and name it was like very abruptly being put into my face of like this happened, so this is a thing that's occurring,
Yeah.
and then like reconciling all of that within myself and like really having to do the deep work of like unraveling and unpacking and seeing how supremacy exists within me, um, how I've internalized that and how I um, unconsciously oppress others because of those programmings and all that stuff, and having to forgive myself, you know, like it's just it was to be able to um not only notice it, that it's something that exists, but then also notice where it exists within you is
Mm-hmm.
not, it's I mean it's everyone needs to do it, and it's also not easy work to do, you
Yep.
know,
Yep.
it's
Yep.
very confronting, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it needs to be done because I feel like the only way we can resolve this, what feels very much like a plague and like um, it almost feels like a corrupt virus that exists within the collective,
Mm-hmm.
that like actually it's not in alignment with the natural way of being, is we
Yeah.
all have to actually do the work of seeing it within ourselves, within our family systems, within our community systems and all of that, and actually uh, take back the power
Yeah.
and you know, and that's confronting work. Most people
Totally.
don't want to do that.
I'm so glad you're speaking of this.
Yeah.
Oof, yeah, I resonate very deeply with what you just said. As like kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about the like the blatantness of
Yeah.
oppression in India in this moment, the way in which at least like the social spaces that I occupy are able to articulate these forms of oppression that are playing out
Yeah.
with like there's an ability, there's an access to articulating that in its raw blatantness. Like I'm able to see that authoritarianism is like in my face. There's
Yeah.
no other, like there's no looking away. But the shadow side of that access
Yeah.
is that I can take a moral high ground and say I am anything but that.
Yeah.
When you are so blatantly authoritarian in my face, I
Yeah.
can totally go to a place of like saying, you know, I'm not like you. I'm different from you. I'm like, but truth is, I belong to that social location
Yeah.
that benefits from this system of oppression.
Yeah.
I come from that. I come from a lineage of Brahmins. I come from a, a social location that has afforded me access to an English speaking education,
Yeah.
um, multiple resources to go to the US to get an alternative education.
Yeah.
That's hella many layers of
Yeah.
privilege for me to cross and get there and have that experience.
Yeah.
It's like you were saying earlier, of that, like getting to that point of spiritual bypassing to say, you know what, all of this is too much, I want nothing to do with it, like let's just be with love and light. I can totally go there because that's what the path is set for me as.
Yeah.
um and like there's the path that's set for me that way, and then there's when like there's this other dynamic of oppressive systems being so loud and jarring that I can totally choose to be like, nope, I'm anything but that.
Yeah.
But to integrate myself in relationship to my context,
Yeah.
and therefore looking within for all the ways in which the authoritarian, um the fascist, the patriarch, the toxic masculine, all of them reside in me. They also are in me, right? Like there's no, I can't escape that.
Yeah.
I can't just do away with that.
Yeah.
um like I remember we explored so much around internalized oppression and
Yeah.
looking at what we internalize um as receivers of systems of oppression when we're located in the United States with our social locations and stuff.
Yeah.
But the work is really like, if we really want to change the course of history,
Yeah.
and if we really want to work with healing our ancestors and holding them accountable as well, then we really need to like examine and be in a constant relationship with all those parts of us that we'd rather disown, all
Yeah.
the parts of us that we don't like very much, parts of us that may replicate the,
Yeah.
the oppressor, or parts of us that look exactly like the oppressor.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and that feels so critical to any form of healing.
Yeah.
And I've like being witness to you, being in this relationship with you, I felt super guided in terms of that kind but also accountable kind of relationship with my ancestors, where we're not just like about saying that they were all like all our ancestors were only receivers of oppression,
Right.
but a lot of our ancestors were people who made terrible mistakes, and
Yeah.
we get to be in a relationship with them, and we get to hold them accountable for their mistakes. We get
Yeah.
to be in communication with them and let them know that, yo, you fucked up, like
Yeah.
look what's going on now, and
Mm-hmm.
look what I'm having to clean up. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing this work, we're doing
Mm-hmm.
this work, we're not like saying this is not my shit, I'm just gonna like let it be. Like sometimes people say, I'm not my ancestors, this is their mistake, not mine. But
Yeah.
if it's their mistake, that means we need to do something about it, and we get to be angry with
A
them.
responsibility. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and we get to have all our feelings, all the feelings that we have towards them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it makes me think of like, what does it mean to be an ally? Oh, let me try that sentence again. So what does it mean to be an ally? You know, or why it's important to be an ally?
Mhm.
And you named about like privilege, like what privilege looks like too. And that's, I think people get so oftentimes get so like stuck with the word privilege, meaning like they think it means like you had an easeful experience in life, and that's not actually what it means, at least in this terms of like when you have privilege, it's like the systems of oppression that oppress people because of their race, because of their socioeconomic class, because of their education, because of their status, their immigration status, because they're, you know, it's like so many different kinds that have been built up by the supremacy
Yeah.
of like the supremacy of all those different classes or
Mhm.
systems.
Mhm.
It's like if you have privilege, and let's say if you don't have to worry about your race, or if you don't have to worry about your socioeconomic status, or if you don't have to, if those things weren't things that were challenges for you, then like how can you, like, I mean, I have privilege in ways like, obviously I don't have white privilege because I'm not white, but I have privilege in my education and my immigration status and my um sure there's a lot more. I'm just gonna name those instead of going down a list. But then it's like my responsibility um to see like how can I utilize my privilege to support those who don't have those privileges.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very essential. I feel like it's very essential in ways of healing those things that, like, yeah, you know, my father's lineage, as far as I know, they, uh, so they're Catholics from Kerala, and they had positions of, uh, I guess you can say like hierarchy, because they were like the priest and the bishops and the nuns, and and so they
Mm-hmm.
had status. I think my father, I mean, I don't think my father one time was describing to me as our family tree, the lineage that we come off of, being like the Kennedys of Kerala. And I didn't know this all of my life. And like, what does that mean? And there's so much more to like for me yet to learn about that. But like for me, well, I was like, oh, that's privilege. Like if
Yeah.
you're gonna compare our tree, we're a branch off that tree, but if you're gonna compare that tree to being compared to like one of the biggest family dynasties in the US, and I'm like, okay, there's some privilege there. And so then that makes me think of, okay, so then how did you oppress people? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's because you were Catholic doesn't mean you were like good. um,
Mm-hmm.
whole other conversation I could go into, which I'm not going to go into right now. But and the ways, like I feel very clear that the systems of oppression that have existed in either one of my family lineages like stop with me. Like that trauma, all of the trauma, whether it's being oppressed or being the oppressor, because that to be the oppressor, I don't know how you can escape the trauma of doing that,
Yeah.
because that's in violation of life to be an
Yeah.
oppressor. And so there's trauma there too. And so I
Yeah.
feel very clear of like, it is upon me to heal as much of that trauma, if not all of that trauma, so that it doesn't get passed down into future generations.
Yeah.
I would like to have children someday, but even if I don't have children someday, like anyone in my lineage going forward, I don't want them to have to deal with the karma of our ancestors, and like
Mm-hmm.
feel very clear about that.
Yeah.
And um, because my eyes have been open to um, the shadow of this world, like it
Mm-hmm.
feels I can't close my eyes again.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I were to try to force my eyes to close again, like that wouldn't work. I imagine I'd spiral into a very deep depression because of that. And so it feels like very uh, my responsibility to like support the freedom of all, you know? I get like really fired up. Like I'm like my body is like burning right now in this conversation, because it's just like enough is enough. Like what the heck? Like what, you know? Like, isn't everyone else exhausted about this too?
Yeah.
Like why does history have to continue to repeat itself? Like come on. We can do better than that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if you do have privilege and you have to, not that you have to, well, you do have to like give up some of that privilege, but it doesn't have to be like to to equate like giving up privilege would be like then that means you suffer. Like what if like in sharing your privilege with those who don't have privilege, actually amplifies everything, so that there's more reciprocity, so then therefore there's more abundance, and that there's more of actual love and light, because everyone's taking responsibility for their shit, and
Yeah.
also like taking care of one another. Humans they need connection. So like
Yeah.
what if doing that, the thing that you fear happening is actually not what's going to happen. It's actually going to make everything a lot better. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hello.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
also like the flip of that is something that we've talked about this before, of um like there is also the shadow of um um like when you think of cancel culture, for example, like
Mm,
that is a as a I don't know if it's a movement is the right word to say, but it's a thing that's
mm,
happening that
mm,
looks like uh doing what I just named, but actually is oppressing.
mm.
It's not oppressing, it's causing more damage than it is good,
Wow.
because it doesn't actually allow for the the healing to fully occur.
Mhm,
It's just what it looks like for me, or what it feels like is like, you know, the oppressor, whoever that is, threw
mhm,
mud at
mhm,
the
mhm.
person they harmed, and then that person's throwing the mud back, and it's just literally like throwing mud back and forth. And like it's
Yeah.
not like just mud, it's like toxic mud that has poison in it, and it's actually just really harmful. And in that experience, like the mud splatters and it hurts more people that have nothing, you know what I mean? It just like
Yeah.
amplifies.
Yeah.
And then the next thing you know, everyone's in a like a mud fight.
Yeah. And it's one thing to walk away from your abuser and cancel them from your life
Yeah,
and say, I'm not gonna
totally.
engage in this poison.
Boundaries.
And that's a personal self-regulatory choice.
Yeah. Yes.
Mm, but that's very different from
Yeah.
what has become of cancel culture, which is to not have any belief in the power of someone's humanity, to
Yeah.
not have any belief that someone is capable of transformation,
Yeah.
um, and to
You're
like
essentially
collectively,
canceling
yeah,
them.
yeah, and to say that like to kind of club that both those experiences, right?
Yeah.
Like um, if I have not, if like yes, I can choose to disengage with a person, a celebrity
Yeah.
who has been called out for abuse. I
Yeah.
like, I can choose to disengage in solidarity with those who have been harmed by that person, and I can also choose to maybe listen to their music because I have a personal relationship with that music, or
Yeah.
to trust that I may choose to disengage, but there have to be others who are working with that person.
Yeah.
We need to collectively have this capacity to
Yeah.
trust in transformation, to trust
Yeah.
in transformative justice, to trust
Yeah.
in restorative justice,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
least restorative
Yeah.
justice, if not
Yeah.
transformative justice.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's something about like collectively disengaging with people who are harmful or have engaged in profoundly harmful behaviors feels like, so what happens to them? So what
Yeah.
happens to this relationship? What happens to whoever they've impacted?
Yeah.
Like it's like a standstill. Like
Yeah.
this is not movement.
Yeah.
um, it's very similar to carceral culture, right?
Yeah.
Like the criminal
Totally.
justice system is basically cancel culture,
Yeah.
and that we've seen that the criminal justice system does not do any good to anybody.
Hmm.
um
It doesn't
yeah,
allow for the wounds to actually heal. So then
yeah,
they fester. And in many ways, it makes me think of like, again, like spiritual bypassing and how the,
yeah,
love and light, and that you don't acknowledge the shadow. And then the
yeah,
shadow like continues to um, seek ways to find resolution,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and, and,
exactly.
and it can be in very nefarious ways that happens, or
Yeah.
the wounds can hijack your experience and then color the way that you see the world. And then
Mhm.
you have these subconscious stories that are like operating, that are like informing the way that you see the world because of that. And it's all because you just haven't given yourself the time to explore the shadow and the wounds and all those, you know, systems of oppression that reside within you.
Yep, yep, for sure. And like you were saying earlier about like the actual love and light,
Yeah.
um like there is joy in doing difficult work. There is
Yeah.
such deep fulfillment um, in confronting the pain within us. Like I was just thinking today, and I found myself thinking this before. Whenever I'm so earlier today, I was at a protest, protesting the wrongful incarceration of a young environmental activist by this government. Um, and at the protest, and I'm because of COVID, because of the pandemic, an earlier uprising, a political revolution that was unfolding during the anti-CAA protests back in 2019, early 2020. There had to be a break in between, and then now slowly things are opening up in India, and therefore people are gathering on the streets in resistance again. And something that was coming back for me was a recognition that this every time I'm at a protest gathering where people are engaging with something profoundly uncomfortable, such as like naming and just being in this shared dissent, the shared difference from what is being imposed on us, I find that to be like a spiritual practice. I
Totally.
feel like the energy that rises in me, the fired up feeling,
Yeah.
is one way um, of being spiritually aligned with the land and with culture and with what's happening.
Yeah.
And that feels like a form of love and light in its paradox, like in all of its paradox. Like it feels like that's like being amongst people who are expressing their deepest, most painful, maybe not most painful, but some very painful emotions, and asking for needs and drawing a boundary with the oppressor. That's a spiritual practice I'm into. Like
Totally.
that's one way of engaging with spirit, and engaging with our deepest inner truths.
Yeah.
Um, and there's just like when you said, the actual love and light, I was like, yeah, that sounds like it.
Yeah. 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 It does. It can exist. It's
Yeah.
just there's a particular way that it can exist without oppressing everyone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
oppressing others, you know.
It's specific alchemy to like have that in like inner boundary
Yeah.
between um like how am I able to show up in resistance without taking a moral high ground,
Totally.
without saying that I'm above all of this and I disapprove of what's happening,
Yeah.
versus saying I'm impacted, I'm experiencing pain, and I
Yeah.
want to like draw a boundary here, and therefore I'm going to show up,
Yeah.
um, and give feedback to say that you know what, this hurts.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I feel like we can continue talking about this because there's just so much that's coming up for me. Like, yeah, and then this and that, and I'm like, oh, like also mindful of time. Like, okay,
Mm.
don't want this conversation to be 2 hours long. Fine, okay. um, but I will say one more thing.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
um,
Yep.
when you've spoken of the moral high ground a few times today, and every time you say it, like there's like a ping that happens for me. I'm like, oh yeah, that, and I feel like that's. Um, I remember in our program that we studied, we were not in this class together, but I know there was a good basic, like we had to take this class as in the first semester. I can't remember the name of the class, but I remember learning about the beginner's mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so then for me, when I learned about that, I was like, yes, that. The beginner's mind for me feels like always being open, being humble, utilizing discernment, being curious, like all of those, using all of those tools, practicing all of those tools as a way of engaging with life. Um, it feels, I it's very uncomfortable, and it's something that I've had to um, not so much practice, but like build the muscles within me of
Mm.
like, if I ever cause harm to someone, me as Natalie, I am willing to go there with you and resolve that. That is something that it has been incredibly uncomfortable for me, because I've had to like tend to the wounds that may come up, where like you're a bad person, you
Mm.
did this, like whatever those stories are, those wounds that have maybe in the past prevented me from being able to willingly go into those kinds of conversations. But I'm at this point now that like, if I've caused harm to someone, and if you want to resolve that harm without causing more harm, because there's a way that you can go into wanting to resolve harm, but then you're projecting your stuff onto that person too. So like, I have a boundary, like I'm not going to allow for projection upon me, but
Yeah.
I'm also willing to go there in that conversation, as
Yeah.
uncomfortable as it may be,
Yeah.
and meet whoever that person is in that place to
Mhm.
actually resolve what has occurred, to like meet again in the heart. And it's something that I'm willing to do that with others. And I like love holding space for
Mm.
people to come together to do that with one another. That's like actually one of the things that I I find so much joy in doing that,
Mhm.
because I mean, I just know how important it is. I like wish people would use me more to be able to do that. Like, I'm here, I'm open to that. Whoever's listening to this, if you're wanting support around that, like call me. I'm your girl. I got this. Like, true, like I'm like laughing as I'm saying that, but like really, like,
Yeah.
this, Shal, about me. Like, it's just something that
Yeah.
when it comes to like, I mean, you were one of the people that like have um introduced me into restorative justice and like the potential of that. And I feel like it's something that, you know, we can actually truly find healing within the conflict that
Yeah.
arises between one another,
Mhm.
and meet back in the heart. And it's a really beautiful place to be in. And so much beauty in life can be created from those places,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like, I want people to like experience that more. And then it's
Yeah.
not easy. I'm not going to pretend like that's an easy place to be in, because it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, to be confronted with the ways you hurt someone, I mean, gosh, it's painful.
Mhm. Yeah.
And also, you'll survive that. Like, you
Yeah.
will survive that experience, even though it feels like going into it you won't survive, but you will.
Yeah. And there's something so deeply fulfilling
Yeah,
about being with truth
yeah,
and truth telling.
yeah,
There's something very, like, I find that non-binariness of, like, it's so painful, but it's so beautiful.
yeah,
Like, it's so painful, but it feels so right.
yeah,
Like in my heart, like that non-binary state of being feels like, I think that's, for me, that's where I know healing can exist.
yeah. Feels like very life affirming.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Thank you for sharing this part of you with me today.
Mm.
Um, really cherishing
Mm.
this. Yeah.
I'm calling in more of that kind of feeling
Mhm.
for all of us. Because, like, again, aren't you tired? I know, I know I am. Like, come on,
Yeah.
we could do better.
Yeah.
We have so much more tools and awareness now than like generations before just didn't not have.
Yeah.
You know?
And so many tools that generations before had, and we get to like ask for that and receive that. Like,
Totally.
there's so much work that has been done before us that we
Yeah,
get to like move from.
yeah,
That's a gift that I keep wanting to remind myself every time I drop into exhaustion. It's like, oh right, no, and then there's so much work that was done before,
yeah,
so that I could join in and like move from here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, before we end our conversation today, Shal, I would love if you could share what are you currently creating in your life?
Mm. What am I currently creating in my life? This year, an intention that I set for myself is actively creating more space within, sort of
Mm,
like this internal home that I'm
mhm,
trying to create and nurture more, because strangely, my response to the pandemic
mhm,
was not so much to go inwards, but to be more vigilant about the outside world because of the kind of social systems that were breaking down
yeah,
in response to the lockdown, in response to the very unsupported structures in the society that I live in. So that meant like I was out on the streets a lot doing a certain amount of organizing work. Um, I started teaching a bunch of classes. I took on a lot more work as a therapist. This year, I
mm,
want to create space to go inwards.
mm,
Um, I want to create the right conditions inside me to travel, do that traveling, to do that journeying
mm,
inwards, and to receive the support of um, multiple forms of medicine
mhm,
to be on those
yeah,
journeys. Um, and I'm curious what that will look like.
mm,
I I don't know yet what that's going to look like, but that's my hope
yeah,
for for this year.
beautiful.
And I'm also just noticing that on the outside, as more and more things are opening up, life is starting to feel a little more busy. So I'm kind of doing this dance of how do I
Balance.
like balance that and also nurture this inwards journey that I
Yeah,
want to nurture.
yeah,
Um, that's what I'm kind of intending to create,
cool.
or maybe even actively as we're speaking, I am creating.
Yeah.
What about you, Nat?
Ooh, what am I creating? I'm creating this series, which has been really fun. um, to engage in conversations with people around many different things and to share those conversations. Um, it feeds a part of me that like deeply misses connection with people who not so much, well, yeah, you're part of my community, so there is like-mindedness, but there's something very deep and intimate about the connections with those who I'm engaging with that feels like I just miss that, you know?
Mm,
And so
mm,
that's, yeah.
mm.
Mm.
That's beautiful.
And
I
also like creating like a deepening my connection with my ancestors and uh, my team, my spiritual team, my homies, as they like to call them. Yeah, and like my connection with um, like my, I guess what people will call like your higher self,
Mm,
cultivating and creating. Um, yeah, I don't know the right words to express that, but
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks for
that's
asking.
that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with me. And thank you
Mhm.
for sharing this space that you've created, that you are creating with
Mm,
me,
thank
for
you.
sharing this with me. Yeah.
Mhm. And if folks would want to find you, follow you, connect with your work, um, connect with you,
Mm.
how can they do that?
Um, I feel like social media really captures such a fraction, like tiny fraction of who I am.
Yeah.
So, um, but it's also one way for folks to reach me. So
Mhm.
I have an Instagram handle called Therapy for Liberation.
Mm.
That's one way that you can like connect with me. You can send me messages. Um, I also have a website through which you can send me messages. My website is called shalinirao.net. That's SHALINIRAO.net. I would love to connect, and just a word of general discernment that what you see on social media is a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of who I am or how I experience myself.
Mhm.
That's just something that I feel like saying, because I feel like we're living in a time and age where so much of our sense of self is like being pulled by social media technology to become embedded in those images
Yeah.
that we see on the screen. uh, just felt like naming that.
Yeah. I appreciate
Mhm.
that because I totally am the same. Like you,
Yeah, yeah,
you only
totally.
see what I let you see.
Right. Yeah.
Just because social media is an interesting thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And for folks who are not in India that would like to support, engage, be allies,
Hmm.
because I feel like that's really important, you know,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
to do so.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I feel like that in that way, social media can help
Yeah,
um,
very, very true.
explore the ways to do that.
Yes, thank you so much for
I want to
saying that.
encourage people to do that.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Really, thank you for saying that, because I'm just recognizing that, like, yeah, my personal relationship with social media in terms of my own presence on it is totally about like fractions and images.
Yeah,
But like you said, this is an opportunity and a space for a platform for us to also amplify voices and experiences and realities that need to be amplified, right? Like, so folks who, like, right now what's really alive for me is folks who are not in India, and are not very familiar with what I've been speaking about in terms of like the farmers protests, or this political uprising, this
yeah,
revolution that is being called upon. Is like, a lot of that information is not available. A lot of folks don't know what the hell
yeah,
is going on.
yeah,
So if you all have an inclination or a curiosity, follow maybe Greta Thunberg and see what she's talking about, because that's very relevant. Like, she's, and I'm kind of directing you towards Greta's work, because that's so much more like safe, and like that will not be taken down by the
yeah,
government.
yeah,
um so follow what she's sharing about India, and that's trusted work.
yeah,
I like that. That's and please know that, like, just to know that any attempts for dissent, any attempts for solidarity are being endangered. Human rights are in grave danger
yeah,
in where I'm at right now.
yeah,
um and so to please have the space in your heart to know that some international solidarity and amplification will will be good for us.
yeah.
um, yeah.
Yeah, because once we pay attention to what's happening more and make it more of a, because it's not, I mean, I don't really listen to the news that much, but
Yeah.
I'll tell you, like, from the very small snippets of what I've seen of what is being shown here in the US, it's, I haven't heard anything about India.
Yeah.
And so the more that we can amplify of like, hello, pay attention to this, the
Mhm.
more that we can actually prevent more human rights
Yeah.
violations from occurring. I feel.
Totally. And I generally feel like we all need to do more work in terms of knowing the people's movements that
Yeah,
are happening across the planet. And
totally.
this is one of them.
Yeah,
Like I ask not for political agenda, but because this is a people's movement.
yeah,
Um, and I think we all need to do that for multiple people's
yeah,
movements happening
absolutely.
across the planet.
Yeah. I mean, there's so multiple people's movements happening here
Yeah.
in Turtle Island, not
Yes.
even just the United States, but like all of Turtle Island.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and people's movements mostly led, mostly indigenous people's movements,
Mhm.
and that all need to be amplified. That is mostly good. I do utilize, I'll say, utilize social media for that.
Mhm. Mhm.
One thing that I appreciate about it is learning about that and learning ways to support.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, my dear. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you to all of you who are still listening and tuning in for joining us today. I hope this conversation has been nourishing for you. And
Mm.
yeah, sending some.
Thank you, Nat. Thank you. And I feel super nourished by contact with you. And I hope the folks who've been listening to us um, also receive some of that nourishment, experience some of that nourishment.
So, have a lovely rest of your evening, my friend.
And I hope you have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Cosmic Earth Conversations. I hope it was supportive for you. And please take a moment to like and subscribe to this video and to this channel so you can be informed of the next time an episode drops. Many blessings to you on your journey.